"They're finished," Commander Brax growled, his talons tapping impatiently against the edge of the tactical display table. His yellow eyes scanned the endless stream of casualty reports and distress signals from the Mazar homeworld. A species that can't defend itself doesn't deserve saving. Around him, the other coalition leaders murmured in uneasy agreement. The Mazar, a fragile species barely capable of interstellar travel, had become the latest target of the Zak Consortium, a brutal alliance of warlike empires. The Zak swept through Mazar space like a wildfire, leaving scorched worlds and shattered fleets in their wake. No one dared stand against them, and certainly not for a species like the Mazar. The Galactic Council's chambers had been filled with debates and protests over the last few weeks. Some argued for an intervention, citing morality and precedent. Others insisted on neutrality, claiming that the Mazar had brought this upon themselves through their lack of preparation. But most agreed on one thing: saving them wasn't worth the risk. "Is there no one foolish enough to intervene?" Brax finally asked, his voice heavy with disdain. A low, multi-toned voice answered from across the room. It belonged to Senator Caro, a gray-skinned Thracian whose cybernetic implants gave him access to council communications in real time. "The humans," Caro said, his glowing ocular lenses blinking erratically. "Their fleet is en route." The room went silent. Every leader turned to stare at him in disbelief. "The humans?" Brax spat, his scaled crest flaring in frustration. "What are they thinking? The Zak will tear them apart, they have no chance." Caro's synthetic eyes flickered. "Apparently they have some kind of agreement with the Mazar. A promise and agreement?" Brax scoffed, baring sharp teeth. "This is war, not a trade negotiation. Agreements mean nothing here." "Perhaps not to us," Caro replied, "but apparently the humans see it differently." High above the smoldering Mazar homeworld, the ISS Vanguard, Earth's flagship, entered orbit. Captain Aaron Calloway stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the hellscape below. Smoke and ash darkened the sky, and what little light pierced through revealed cities reduced to rubble. "Captain," his first officer, Lieutenant Graves, spoke from the tactical console. "Zak forces are closing in on the last civilian zones. Casualties are projected to exceed 90% in the next hour." Calloway's jaw tightened. The Mazar had been barely holding on when his fleet arrived. Their defenses, what little there had been, were all but gone. "What about their evacuation efforts?" he asked. "Too slow," Graves replied. "Without intervention, the entire species will be wiped out." The captain's gaze hardened. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and deep in hostile space. The Zak would relish obliterating the humans as much as the Mazar. But Calloway wasn't here for an easy fight. "Deploy all strike teams," he ordered, "at ground and air. Every second we delay costs lives." "Aye, Captain," Graves said, the crew springing into action around him. As the human fleet moved into position, a transmission came through from the Mazar leaders. The voice on the other end was trembling with desperation. "Earth, you came? We thought we were forgotten." Calloway didn't hesitate. "You were never forgotten. We made a promise." The transmission ended and Calloway turned to the view of the planet below. His voice was steel as he gave the order. "Commence the drop." The sky over the Mazar capital ignited as human drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, their descent streaked with fire. On the ground, Mazar civilians cowered beneath crumbling structures, their eyes wide with disbelief as the metallic cylinders slammed into the earth with the force of meteors. For weeks, the Zak Consortium had dominated the battlefield, their towering soldiers marching through the ruins unchallenged. But now, chaos rippled through their ranks. The first human soldiers emerged from the pods like specters, their armor blackened by re-entry and their movement swift. The Zak, hulking and confident in their brute strength, snarled as they charged the newcomers. They expected easy prey. They were wrong. A squad of humans led by Sergeant Lex Martinez hit the ground running. Their weapons, smaller and more rugged than the gleaming Zak armaments, barked out rapid bursts of fire. The first Zak soldier to approach was dropped mid-charge, a bullet piercing the weak point between his armor plates. Another tried to flank but was met with a flash of steel as Martinez's combat blade found his neck. The Mazars, watching from behind makeshift barricades, were stunned. Their defenders had fought bravely, but they lacked the coordination and lethality of these humans. The Zak, for all their technological superiority and physical dominance, faltered under the relentless assault. Above the battlefield, Captain Calloway stood in the cockpit of a descending shuttle, gripping the support rail as he watched his forces deploy. "Graves, status?" he barked into his comms. "Western districts are under control," Graves replied from the bridge of the Vanguard. "But the Eastern Front is a mess. Zak artillery units have entrenched themselves near the industrial zone. They're pinning down the Mazar civilians." Calloway's jaw tightened. "Prepare a strike. I want those guns silenced." The shuttle touched down amidst the ruins and Calloway leapt out, his boots crunching against the ash-laden ground. Around him, human troops pressed forward, their discipline and precision cutting through the chaos. They moved in small coordinated squads, leveraging cover and terrain to outmaneuver the Zak's larger numbers. "Captain!" A Mazar elder, flanked by two trembling aides, stumbled toward him. Her thin limbs shook and her voice cracked with fear. "You came, but why? Why would you risk yourselves for us?" Calloway's gaze didn't waver. "We don't abandon our allies," he said simply. "Stay behind cover. We'll hold them off." A deafening explosion rocked the battlefield as a Zak mortar shell detonated nearby, sending debris flying. Calloway ducked behind a collapsed wall, his rifle in hand. "Martinez," he called through his comms. "Push toward the artillery. I'll take the left flank." "Yes, sir," Martinez's voice crackled back. The human soldiers pressed forward, every step a struggle against the relentless Zak. Plasma fire streaked through the air, scorching the ground and punching holes in cover. The Zak roared as they closed in, their sheer size and power driving fear into the hearts of lesser foes. But the humans didn't flinch. As Calloway advanced, he found himself face to face with a towering Zak warrior, its crimson armor glowing with energy. The alien let out a guttural growl and swung a massive blade toward the human captain. Calloway dodged, the edge slicing the air just inches from his helmet. With a quick pivot, he drove his combat knife into the joint of the Zak's armor, a burst of blue ichor spraying out as the alien collapsed. "Keep moving," Calloway shouted, rallying his soldiers as the Zak began to falter. The ground beneath their feet was scorched and bloodied, but the humans pushed on, their relentless determination breaking the enemy's momentum. From a distance, the Zak commander watched the unfolding chaos through his tactical visor. His forces were supposed to be unstoppable. The humans, those fragile creatures from a backwater planet, weren't supposed to be able to do this. Yet here they were, carving through his lines with surgical precision. "They're just delaying the inevitable," the commander growled to his subordinates. "Prepare the warlord." Deep within the Zak formation, the ground began to rumble. The rumbling beneath the battlefield grew louder, shaking the foundations of the ruined Mazar capital. Human soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their instincts warning them of a new threat. Captain Calloway's voice crackled over the comms. "Eyes up, everyone! The Zak are bringing in something big!" As if on cue, the ground erupted near the Zak's central command, sending debris and shattered pavement into the air. From the crater emerged a massive figure, easily twice the size of the other Zak warriors. Its crimson armor was layered with energy shields that shimmered menacingly, and in its hands, it wielded a colossal energy hammer crackling with deadly arcs of plasma. The Zak warlord, human and Mazar forces alike froze, their gazes fixed on the monstrous figure. The warlord's glowing eyes scanned the battlefield, landing on the human soldiers who had dared to defy his army. He let out a deafening roar that echoed through the streets, a primal challenge that sent a shiver down the spines of even the most battle-hardened fighters. "Vance, status report!" Calloway barked into his comms as he took cover behind a shattered wall. Vance's voice came back, tense but steady. "We've got heavy Zak reinforcements pushing on both flanks, Captain, but the big guy's heading straight for us." Calloway peered over the rubble, his sharp eyes locking onto the warlord as it began its deliberate march toward their position. "Hold your ground. Focus fire on that thing. We take it down. and the Zak lose their edge. The humans opened fire, their coordinated assault lighting up the battlefield. Bullets and rockets rained down on the warlord, the sheer volume of fire enough to fell a small building. But the creature's energy shields absorbed the barrage, glowing brighter with each impact. It raised its hammer and slammed it into the ground, unleashing a shockwave that tore through the ruins and sent soldiers sprawling. Calloway rolled to his feet, coughing from the dust. "Martinez, hit those shields with EMP rounds. We need to strip them before we can do real damage." "On it, Captain," Martinez replied. His squad deployed, firing grenades designed to overload the warlord's shields. The explosions crackled with electric energy, and for a moment the warlord faltered as its defenses flickered. But the respite was short-lived. With a guttural snarl, it charged forward, swinging its hammer in wide arcs that pulverized the ground and sent chunks of rubble flying. The humans fell back, regrouping behind hastily constructed barricades. Calloway's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The warlord was unlike anything they had faced before. Strong, relentless, and seemingly impervious to their weapons. "We need to hit it where it hurts," he muttered to himself before switching his comm channel. "Graves, do we still have that heavy ordnance on the vanguard?" "Affirmative, sir," Graves replied. "But it'll take time to line up a shot with all the interference from the city's debris." "Make it happen," Calloway ordered. "We'll keep it occupied until you're ready." The warlord roared again, its hammer glowing with an intense light as it prepared to unleash another devastating shockwave. Calloway stood firm, his rifle aimed directly at the creature's head. "You want us?" he muttered under his breath. "Come and get us." The humans launched a coordinated counterattack, drawing the warlord's attention with concentrated fire and hit-and-run tactics. Soldiers darted between cover, firing EMP rounds and explosives to weaken its shields further. Martinez's squad managed to land a direct hit, causing the shield to collapse momentarily. "Now's our chance," Calloway yelled, charging forward with a combat blade in hand. He leapt onto the warlord's massive arm, driving the blade into a joint where the armor was weakest. The warlord howled in pain, flinging its arm wildly to shake him off. Calloway held on, his grip tightening as he worked to disable the alien's weapon arm. "Captain, what are you doing?" Vance's voice came through the comms, laced with both awe and panic. "Buying us time," Calloway grunted as he drove another blade into the warlord's exposed flesh. Blue ichor sprayed from the wound and the warlord staggered, its movements becoming erratic. Graves' voice came over the comms. "Ordnance is locked. Clear the area, Captain." Calloway let go, dropping to the ground and rolling to safety as the warlord swung its hammer in a final, desperate attempt to crush him. The humans scrambled to retreat, leaving the warlord standing alone in the open. A deafening roar filled the air as the vanguard fired its heavy weapon. A streak of light shot through the sky, hitting the warlord square in the chest. The resulting explosion was blinding, a fiery shockwave that obliterated everything in its radius. When the dust settled, all that remained of the warlord was a smoldering crater. Cheers erupted from the human soldiers as they regrouped, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The Zak forces, seeing their champion defeated, began to retreat in disarray, their once mighty advance reduced to chaos. Calloway stood amidst the ruins, catching his breath as he watched the Zak flee. He activated his comms. "Graves, status?" "The Zak are retreating, Captain. We've done it." But Calloway's expression remained grim. "This isn't over. They'll be back, and we need to make sure the Mazar are ready for them." The victory was theirs, but Calloway knew the fight for the Mazar's survival was far from finished. The retreating Zak forces left behind a city in ruins. Smoke continued to rise from the shattered skyline, and the air carried the acrid tang of scorched metal and ash. The Mazar capital was a husk of its former self, but it still stood, against all odds. Captain Calloway surveyed the battlefield, his eyes scanning for survivors and injured soldiers. The humans had held the line, but the cost had been steep. "Casualty report?" he asked Vance, who was limping slightly as he approached. "We've lost about a third of our forces," Vance replied grimly. "The rest are still operational, but we've got injuries across the board. Ammo's running low and morale..." Well, we've seen better days. Calloway nodded, his jaw tight. We'll have time to rest later. Right now, I need every able body focusing on securing the perimeter and evacuating the remaining civilians. As his men dispersed to carry out his orders, Calloway turned his attention to the Mazar leaders who were slowly emerging from their shelters. Their wide, reflective eyes were filled with a mix of awe and hesitation as they approached the humans who had risked everything to save them. One of the leaders, a slender figure named Jarik, stepped forward. His voice trembled as he addressed Calloway. You saved us. Against impossible odds, you held the line. Calloway met Jarik's gaze, his expression unwavering. We had a deal. Humanity doesn't abandon its allies. Jarik's trembling hands gestured to the ruins around them. But why? We have nothing to offer. No technology, no resources. We're a fragile species compared to you. Why risk so much for us? Calloway hesitated, the weight of his answer settling heavily on his shoulders. Because that's who we are. Humanity knows what it's like to face insurmountable odds, to feel abandoned. We're not perfect, but we fight for those who can't fight for themselves. It's not about what you can offer us. It's about what's right. Jarik's eyes glistened, and he lowered his head in gratitude. We owe you everything. The moment was interrupted by a sharp crackle over Calloway's comms. Captain, incoming transmission from the Vanguard. High priority. Calloway tapped his earpiece. Go ahead. Graves's voice came through, steady but urgent. Sir, the Zak fleet is regrouping in orbit. We've intercepted their communications. They're calling for reinforcements. Bigger reinforcements. Calloway's stomach sank. How long do we have? Best estimate? 24 hours before they're back with a full armada. Calloway closed his eyes for a brief moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had barely survived this battle, and now they were staring down an even greater threat. He opened, his eyes, his resolve hardening. Understood. Begin preparations for an orbital defense. We'll hold them off for as long as we can. He turned back to Jarik, whose hopeful expression had shifted to one of dread. Your people need to evacuate the planet, Calloway said firmly. We can buy you time, but we can't guarantee victory if the Zak bring their full force. Jarik shook his head. There's nowhere for us to go. Our ships can barely make it to the next system, and we have no allies willing to take us in. Calloway's mind raced. He knew the Mazar couldn't withstand another assault, and humanity's resources were stretched thin across multiple fronts. Then, an idea began to form. A desperate, dangerous idea. We don't run, Calloway said, his voice steady. We dig in. If the Zak want this planet, they're going to have to pay for every inch of it. Jarik blinked, his confusion evident. But how? We'll use the city, Calloway continued. Fortify the ruins, turn every street into a kill zone. If the Zak want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget. The humans and Mazar worked side by side through the night, turning the devastated capital into a fortress. Mazar engineers, inspired by the humans' unrelenting spirit, found renewed purpose. They repurposed their failing technology into traps and improvised weapons, while human soldiers coordinated defenses and trained the Mazar in guerrilla tactics. By dawn, the city was a maze of barricades, ambush points, and fallback positions. It wasn't perfect, but it was all they had. As the sun rose over the horizon, Calloway stood atop a crumbled skyscraper scanning the sky. In the distance, the Zak fleet began to materialize, their ships blotting out the light like a storm. Here they come, Vance said, stepping up beside him. Calloway nodded, his hand tightening around his rifle. Today we show them what it means to fight for something bigger than ourselves. The Zak descended, their forces overwhelming, their intent clear. But as the first wave hit the city's defenses, they were met with a ferocity they had not anticipated. Explosions tore through their ranks as traps were triggered. Human and Mazar fighters worked together seamlessly, their unity a stark contrast to the Zak's brute force tactics. For hours the battle raged. The Zak pressed harder, throwing everything they had at the defenders. But every time they gained ground, the humans and Mazar pushed them back, their determination unyielding. As the second day turned into night, Calloway found himself in the thick of the fighting, his rifle nearly empty but his resolve unbroken. Around him, Mazar soldiers, once timid and unsure, fought with newfound courage, their voices echoing through the battlefield. When the Zak finally retreated, their forces decimated and their morale shattered, Calloway collapsed against a piece of rubble, his chest heaving. The city was in ruins, but it still stood. The Mazar still stood. Vance approached, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. "We did it, Captain. The Zak are pulling out." Calloway looked out over the battlefield, a weary smile breaking through his grime-covered face. "No, Vance. They did it. The Mazar proved they're worth fighting for." For the first time in weeks, the skies over the Mazar capital were clear. The planet had survived, not because of advanced technology or overwhelming force, but because of a simple truth. Unity could overcome even the greatest odds. As Calloway and his men prepared to depart, Jarek approached, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "Captain Calloway, your people have given us more than we could ever repay." Calloway shook his head. "Just promise me one thing. When the time comes, pay it forward." Jarek nodded solemnly. "We will." As the humans left the planet behind, the Mazar stood taller, their spirits unbroken. And in the vastness of the galaxy, a new legend began to spread, of humans who fought not for glory, but for those who had no one else to fight for them.